live in him at the time. And that's the greatest opportunity that he gives us, to live in him at that time. So suffering is there. Body does suffer, but it doesn't somehow or other get registered by our awareness, because our awareness is in him at the time. It's way beyond. It's not cheerfulness. The natural reflections will be that you will be suffering and crying, and you will be bearing it patiently. At the most that you will do this, you will just bear it without making a sound or anything of the sort. But you are always in tune with him, so you don't suffer actually as others suffer. The suffering is witnessed by others, but inwardly you don't suffer because you are in him. You are living in him at the time. So when such a person, such a soul suffers and lives in him, that is his compassion, true compassion. So when you really call him out, well, he is there. There is a difference to calling him out and feeling that we have really called him out. Even if you were to fall thousands of feet, it would appear as if one fell on his lap. It is an air cushion there. There was no hurt. That is his compassion. But when does that person call out spontaneously and truly? When he is definitely going to dedicate himself throughout his lifespan, remembering him. Only then that call of great yearning and longing comes out. His compassion is that he would do his very best to get anyone closer to him and get him out of the rut of these constant incarnations. Not relief from suffering, but more suffering. That's his real compassion. It is the only good weapon he can utilize in order to make us turn towards him and face him. Baba suffers universally through his universal form. Yes, as man we suffer, and we can either take joy and cognizance in the suffering that comes our way, or we must endure suffering in one form or another until he gains our attention and makes us call out to God to be with us. He is everlastingly with us, but we are not conscious of it. Each painful moment is, I believe, beloved Baba knocking upon the door of our heart saying, here is another opportunity to uncover the hidden depths of the unconsciousness. As beloved Baba points out, we act and react in accordance with the prompting of the mental impressions and the stimuli of the environment. The only way to stop the thrust of those impressions is to continually awaken the heart with love for Baba, to stop and think of him between the arising of the impulse and the translation into action. As Baba said whilst I was driving him, it's impossible to stop thoughts. They are there in the mind and arise spontaneously. It is almost impossible to stop thoughts becoming feelings. But it is possible to stop those feelings becoming actions. In the space between feelings and actions, he has given us the chance of freedom from the compulsion of mental impressions. That moment can be a moment of freedom, but the price is the suffering that comes from the denial of the power of the mind. It is not easy to deny the desires of the mind, particularly lust, greed, anger, and as Baba has said, the temptation of money, fame, power and leadership. But the remembrance of Baba and the feeling that wells up from that remembrance can create the strength to overcome the urges of the mind. And that response is helped by reading his messages, picturing him in form and features, repeating his name and listening to stories of his life. A beautiful example of suffering endured and transcended is the story of Homi Satha, father of Roshan Kerawala. There lived in Ahmednagar a Parsi family named Satha. Hope the pronunciation is good. On a large property known as Akbar Press, there were 5 brothers and 4 sisters, and they all became devoted to Baba. Homi was one of the 2 Satha brothers who first had contact with Baba in the early 1920s. He was a locomotive driver on long runs such as Bombay to Delhi, and it is recorded that people would set their clocks by his departures and arrivals. So meticulous was he in his duties. He married, and although both parents were apparently healthy, their first 3 children developed terminal illness by the age of 7. Then, when the 4th and last child was 5 years old, the mother died. Left with 4 children and 3 severely crippled, Homi retired with a retirement fund sufficient to give a monthly pension covering his expenses. This was in 1942. All through this period, and indeed throughout his life, he was also known as Jolly Mama, meaning jolly uncle, because of his constant cheerfulness and lively sense of humour. In 1947, his entire retirement fund was lost when the Muslim company holding the money moved to Pakistan with the partition of India into 2 nations. At that point, beloved Baba called Homi to Maharazad, and while he was taking off his boots to go into Mundley Hall, he heard Baba say to the Mundley, "Homi has won and I have lost." Homi was shocked and hurriedly came in and exclaimed, "Baba, why are you saying that to me? If I have done something wrong, please forgive me." Baba assured him that he had done nothing wrong, but repeated what he had said first. Then he went on, "See, I took away your very young wife, and you did not complain to me. I gave you 3 crippled children, and you did not complain to me. And now I've taken all your money, and you have 4 children still to care for. Still you do not complain to me. Now you have nothing, so what will you do? Baba, I always felt in my heart that all belongs to you. You have given and you have taken away. I know you will never let me down, and that you will provide us all with whatever is necessary." Baba then turned to Sarosh, who was sitting under the window where Erit sat for so many years. You have a big business. From tomorrow, Homie will work for you and you will pay him 150 rupees per month. This was the sum that Homie had been receiving from his retirement fund. He is a most honest man and will take good care of your business. Homie began working for Sarosh accordingly, leaving the house at 7 a.m. and returning at 6 p.m. Another story that comes to mind of suffering and of the joy that lies within that suffering. It is that of the old gardener of a house in which Baba stayed during the new life. His wife had died, and since then he had lived the life of a sadhu. His needs were simple, and he ate very little, usually just boiled rice which he cooked himself. Although he had a small hut, at night he slept in the open on a cot with only a thin cotton sheet covering him. Arising at 4 a.m., he sat singing Ram, Ram, Sita Ram, no matter the freezing cold of the morning. Hearing this, Baba woke the women Mandali to listen to the singing of the Avatar's name. And although sleepy, they rejoiced in the sound of his name. Then during the day, the old man carried out his duties with Ram's name always on his lips. Later in the morning, he took his bath near the well, pouring bucket after bucket of cold water over himself in the freezing weather, with only a light covering around his waist and a cotton cloth over his shoulders. One day, Baba sent Gava to find out if the old man needed anything. But no matter how she pressed him, he answered that he required nothing, and the Thakurji, another name for Krishna, gave him all his needs. It happened that that night was extremely cold, and yet the gardener slept as usual on his cot on the open with only the cotton sheet over him. In the morning, Baba sent Gava again to the old man, saying that a friend wanted to give him something. Gava pressed him again, asked for something, anything. He eventually asked for a box of matches. Baba said, all right, we must call him. I want to give him a blanket. So he was then taken to Baba, who asked him, why only a matchbox? You must ask for something more. But Sahib, I don't need anything more. Thakurji, give me everything. Baba persisted. I want to give you prasad, a gift from me. Take this blanket and a box of matches. The old man was deeply touched that Baba had personally given him the gifts and said, I am blessed. These are a gift from Bhagwan, meaning God. It was noted that during the whole exchange, the old man gazed at Baba without looking down at his presence even once. Although he was not told of Baba's identity, it was as though he was unconsciously acknowledging Baba's divinity. Erit suffered for his beloved God-man, as Peter did for Jesus Christ, as indeed did every right hand of God. Yet Erit said, whoever has lived with Baba, all they would want would be to be with him again. It was not a life of fun, it was a life of joy. And it seemed in listening to him saying this, that little word joy reflected the whole of his life for his beloved Baba. I am reminded of St. Francis explaining to Brother Leo wherein lies perfect joy. And if he, the porter of the monastery, refuses to open and forces us to stand outside all night in the snow and rain, hungry and frozen, then if we bear such ill treatment, abuse and dismissal patiently and calmly without complaint, humbly and charitably thinking that the porter recognises us for the wretches we are, and God moves him to denounce us, write down, Brother Leo, that here is the source of perfect joy. And St. Francis went on, above all the graces and gifts which Christ gives to his friends is that of conquering oneself and willingly enduring sufferings, insults, humiliations and hardships for the love of Christ. For we cannot glory in all those gifts of God as they are not ours, but God's. As we said earlier, we must not think that because beloved Barbara is no longer in the body, we are not subject to his taunts, tests and challenges. He is infinite consciousness, and particularly at present is infinitely active, strongly affecting every aspect of his creation. And the stronger the conscious connection of the individual to him, the more he will provide taunts, tests and challenges to that individual. Yet the more individual seeks to serve him by trying to live his message in the midst of an active life, seeking to be true to the trust he has reposed in one, the more the individual will feel his presence and feel his pleasure in the efforts being made out of love for him. As Erich expressed, it is true that the body does suffer, but when we suffer in him, somehow we do not suffer as others do. They may view our suffering on the surface, but inwardly we are living in him, and the experience is not the same that others think they are watching. Therefore, when we suffer but live in him, we bear witness to God's true compassion. His words given out when in the body can equally apply now. I may scold you as much as I like, but if your conscience tells you that you have done your best, then don't lose your temper nor be depressed, however much I criticize and taunt you. These prickly words have some great motive behind them. Henceforth, swallow your thoughts and suffer everything quietly. You should not be annoyed, but remain in a good humour and be cheerful, despite your reeling mind. Your very wrath shows that you still lack something in carrying out my wish. However I may taunt, hurt or harass you, bear it like a stone and be conscious that you are serving me. To one man he said, you are lucky to have so many hardships. Terrible suffering is the sign of happiness and peace to come. Great heat denotes the coming of rain. Great suffering and intense sorrow indicates that happiness is about to dawn. Anything beyond your capacity will necessarily change your capacity, because as long as everything is within your limits, you don't know what is beyond them. Yes, to have a body is to suffer. Yet I am reminded of words from the Upanishads, that the three greatest blessings one can have in life is to have a human body, a longing for God, and to have a perfect master. This in turn reminds me of a story from Sufi literature. 3 young Sufis were condemned to death by the Sultan for heresy. One stepped forward, asking to be beheaded first. The Sultan was amazed and asked why a man in the prime of life should seek death so eagerly. The Sufi replied that every moment in life was precious because it could be spent in remembrance of the beloved, and he wished to give his brothers the extra moments of life by dying first. One moment in this world is better than 1,000 years of the next world, because this is the place of service, and that is the place of proximity, and proximity is gained by service. The Sultan was so impressed by the young Sufi's love for God that he pardoned the 3 and said, "Ask a boon." They replied, "The only boon we ask of you, that you should forget us, and neither make us your favourites nor banish us from your court, for your favour and displeasure are alike to us." The Sultan wept and dismissed them with honour.
Beautiful.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.